Hello and welcome to the Health for Mzansi podcast, where we bring you inspiring stories from the front lines of medicine. I'm your host, Donamdu. Now today we shine the spotlight on Dr Desiree Moodley, a pioneering gastroenterologist who's shaped by a lifelong commitment to perseverance, compassion, and excellence. Her journey is both inspiring and profound, especially in a field where women leaders are few and far between. Now, while she initially had an interest in arts and culture, her fascination with the human body, its anatomy and physiology led her to pursue medicine. Here's her story. Desiree, it is such an honor to have you join me here on the Health for Mzansi podcast. I was so happy to be able to connect with you, and today we're sharing a little bit more of your story within the health sector, but also just your life journey. Welcome to it. Thank you so much.
Hi, Dawn. Thank you so much for the opportunity of being here today.
I'm just looking a little bit on your background and getting to know you more. I understand that you mentioned, at least to me, that your mother is your biggest inspiration. Maybe you can start with a bit of your growing up years and how her perseverance and dedication really influenced your journey to becoming a gastroenterologist. And then you can tell us more about what that actually is as well, please.
Most of my life being raised by a single parent. So my mom was a single parent. She worked a full-time job and she studied part-time. And I think seeing her struggling and her tenacity throughout this is actually what inspired me. She would work as an accountant for most of it. So she used to do financial year ends. I'd see her working late into the evenings. She used to work weekends, watching someone who put so much effort in. Often I would be at the office with her, reading under the table or something or playing a game just to distract myself. And this is how we would spend much of my childhood, was actually with her working. She also studied. So often we'd go to evening lectures about 3 times a week. And we didn't have a car when I was very young. So we would catch a bus or taxis and often get home after 10 p.m. I was asleep. She was carrying me home from the lectures. That's pure dedication to someone who was wanting to enrich both her life and my life. She wasn't always successful. Juggling being a mother, being a worker and studying, she couldn't always complete modules, didn't get enough credits and things like that. But through that, I saw how she pushed through. She never stopped trying. Every year she'd re-sign up, she'd start new subjects, do new things. And one of the proudest moments of my life is watching my mother, who had just a matric, graduate with a degree at the age of 50. And that for me is the picture of true perseverance and resilience, someone who just kept pushing on despite everything that we faced. She started off as a bookkeeper with a matric and she actually ended up being the company secretary. So that was the complete inspiration for me, that I could be anything I wanted. You just have to keep trying. And if you fail, that's fine. Just keep trying, try again, try a different route, maybe take some time off, but you can achieve what you want to eventually, despite what you have to face. I ended up doing gastroenterology, which is a subsection of internal medicine. So basically dealing with the gut. However, it's not just kind of theoretical stuff. There is a bit of a procedural medicine to it. So we kind of deal with everything that's part of your gut, everything from your mouth to your butt, basically. Looking at your esophagus, your stomach, your intestines. We also deal with the liver and basically the complex interplay between all of these things and your general health. I treat patients both in hospital as well as outpatients, and obviously the procedures as well.
All I can say is when you spoke about your mother now, I'm literally quite teary-eyed just listening to you reflect and share this. I think it's amazing to just listen to you sharing that and where your inspiration came from. And this obviously meant that you were the first person in your family to graduate with a degree. Your upbringing in Chatsworth and the challenges that you face that you've just alluded to, they really shaped your academic and professional aspirations. Maybe you can take us through that, when you obviously realized I need to work as hard, if not more than my mother did, seeing that growing up. What was it like for you? Tell us about that time.
I actually only had a partial upbringing in Chatsworth. My parents were from there. My entire family's from Chatsworth. They relocated, my parents, quite soon after they got married, to Johannesburg. But my parents separated when I was quite young, from about 2 to 3 years old. My mother was alone in a big city that she just moved to. She didn't really have social support. We didn't have family support, and she couldn't afford to keep me with her at the time, on that single salary. So she would actually send me periodically to Durban to live with my grandparents for several months at a time, or, up to a year at a time. So my foundational years were actually spent a lot with my grandparents in Durban, where they raised me. And I think that's where the actual saying of it takes a village to raise a child. Because without that, I think my mom would have probably moved back to Durban if they weren't willing to do that. Seeing what happened to other people who grew up around the area where I did, not necessarily in my case, but opportunities may not have been as available to me if she hadn't made that initial sacrifice of deciding to stick it out and be away from me. And she's always told me, that's one of her biggest regrets, is that she sent me away. But it was a sacrifice that ultimately allowed her to be able to improve her job, get a better job, and be able to stabilize things so that I could come back once I was, in my early primary school years. But having that support, that social structure definitely helped me. I could read before I went to school. And that's actually where love of books and knowledge was instilled in me. And it's actually only grown over time. And I think that's where my love of academics first started when I was younger, because I was the oldest grandchild in my family. So they tended to dote on me at that time. And I think all that love, all that attention definitely helped me, even though I was away from, my mom. I learned early on about adaptability, being able to kind of go with the flow. And that has only helped me now in my adult life.
And then when you now decided that, you wanted to be in the medical field, or you wanted to pursue a career within healthcare, when did that happen for you? Did you always know that this is something that you wanted to do?
They actually know, because I tended to do quite well academically in school. Everyone said, that Indian stereotype of, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be an accountant. And actually, I was against it. I quite enjoyed the arts and culture, and I quite enjoyed English, actually. And I loved to write. And so for the longest time, most of my family actually thought I was going to go into writing. I was actually wanting to be a doctor and do a bit of journalism. And then in high school, around grade 10 or 11, we started doing human biology. And I remember, because I hadn't really enjoyed the plants, but once they started talking about the human body, ironically enough, it was talking about the digestive system, which I think is actually so funny right now. But that I was fascinated with. I thought this is such an amazing thing. The body, the physiology, the anatomy, how intricate we as humans are, and how everything just fits together was, to me, fascinating. I thought it was really just the most clever system in the world, and I really wanted to know more. And I said, wait, I can actually see myself working with this. I really enjoyed the idea behind it. And that's actually what pushed me into pursuing medicine.
So basically from high school, if you can take us through your academic journey. So you went to university, which university you attended? Did you study overall medicine and then specialize later on? And then I know that you've worked quite diverse healthcare settings, from Tygerberg Hospital to Halishiwe Day Hospital in the Northern Cape. How did these experiences, and especially the resource-limited environments, influence your approach to patient care specifically?
So I studied at the University of the Witwatersrand in Joburg. It's a 6-year degree that I actually was able to start straight out of high school. After that, I moved over to Cape Town to do my internship. And then I moved to Kimberley to do my Zuma year, my community service. And then that's actually there where I worked, where I learned a lot about kind of rural medicine. So when I was in Cape Town, I was at a tertiary center, and I think you become very shielded from what rural medicine is like. When you're studying at the med school as well, you don't really have a lot of experience in rural medicine, and you tend to kind of underestimate the limitations that certain rural places do have. You have tests at your fingertips usually when you're at a tertiary center. You don't have to think too much. You can book the scan if you really need to, things like that. So moving to Kimberley, I think it just changed my perspective quite a lot. You learn how to maximize what you have available. You learn to be more economical, and it's kind of a balance between patient care and resourcefulness. And then while I was there at the day hospital, I actually would visit other rural clinics as well, such as Hopetown and as well as Platfontein. Platfontein is home to some of the San tribe. So that was also a mix, because I was seeing a complete cultural difference. They couldn't speak English. Well, 99% of the patients I saw there. So I needed a translator. And it's kind of taking a complete step out of my comfort zone. You need to use the resources you have at hand with this cultural divide and not being able to communicate as effectively as you would like with your patients. And it sometimes can make it difficult to build a strong relationship. But that's what I found you actually need in these areas, because you want to try and understand their unique circumstances, and that can obviously have an impact on their health. And then primary healthcare, I think that is one of the most fundamental parts of health, because if you can fix something at the ground root, you prevent the ripple effect and poor health further down the line. So that's why I learned the importance of healthcare and patient education. Often just giving them a medication and just sending them off is not what you need to do. You need to be educating them. And I think I actually saw the difference it made when you actually explain something properly, how it could actually help them further on down the line. And I think my patient communication and relationships were built there, and it actually helped me become better, especially bedside manner and communication with them. From there, I went back to Cape Town. I worked a number of hospitals, district level, and then Risky as well. And then I went to Tygerberg, where I did my specialization in internal medicine. That took me 4 years. And then from there, I stayed on to be a consultant for several months before I started my fellowship in gastroenterology, which I've just completed.
What an amazing journey. You'd probably go back to your initial ideas of journalism and media and write about it, because it's such a beautiful story to share. Outside of this feature, I think there's so much inspiration in it and with it. And maybe just dropping that there while we're in this conversation. Yes. You just spoke about your focus area, which is gastroenterology. Can you maybe talk to us more specifically around your research, around Helicobacter pylori and peptic ulcer disease, and also more about why you specifically focused on this area of medicine?
As a person who quite enjoys procedures and working with my hands, we have to learn how to do endoscopy. It's a big part of gastro. Especially in the early days of my fellowship, I was doing gastroscopy basically almost every day. And that's where you learn at a tertiary center that ulcers are something that you frequently encounter. And bleeding ulcers can be quite life-threatening. Patients come in very, very sick, and you kind of have to stabilize them, resuscitate them, and hope, to kind of prevent complications. You don't want them to go to theater. You don't want them to die. So it's something that we deal with quite regularly, for something I was seeing quite frequently. And then obviously, if it's something that's so serious, you kind of want to prevent it from happening. And H. pylori, for shorthand, it's an organism that can cause ulcers. It's more prominent in the third world country, and that's said to be that you get it in childhood, and that's because of sanitation, orophycal, that's how you get it. So that is why it's more prevalent in the third world, despite improved sanitation and hand hygiene practices. The reason, that I was so interested in if we can treat it and hence prevent ulcers. But also, for quite a few years now, H. pylori has been classified a class 1 carcinogen by the World Health Organization, meaning that it can cause gastric or stomach cancer. So how do you prevent that from causing cancer? You treat it, what we call eradication therapy. So by giving antibiotics, you can cure a bacteria that causes ulcers and that causes cancer. I'm sure you've heard about antibiotic resistance becoming more and more prevalent worldwide. And so because we're giving antibiotics for this, it's quite a common condition. It's important to know that we're using the right antibiotics. There was a study done in the Eastern Cape, but it's more than 10 years ago now, and that showed that one of the more common antibiotics that we were giving had more than 90% resistance. So you don't really want to be giving something if it's not going to work on the bug. And there's actually no recent studies done in my area locally in Cape Town that kind of show antibiotic resistance. So I was interested in going after this so that we can actually tailor treatment regimens and effectively treat this, reducing complications and gastric cancer as well. Obviously leading to the change in treatment guidelines, both locally and then nationally as well.
Absolutely amazing. I mean, you made that topic so interesting, and I'm looking forward to understanding it more as I'm talking to you, but more so about the work that you've been doing. And I know that you spend quite a bit of time working at Khayelitsha District Hospital, and this seems to hold a very special place in your heart. What were some of the most impactful personal and professional lessons that you learned while working there?
So my time at Khayelitsha was a profoundly formative experience. It's a district hospital. It serves the area of Khayelitsha, which, as we know, is rapidly growing. A large amount of people from the Eastern Cape that are moving in. They've got a busy trauma unit. There's quite a lot of alcohol use in the community. But I think one of the things that struck me is, so this was about, almost 10 years ago now. So even though ARVs had been around for about 10 years, at that time, evolving landscape. And we used to see, and probably still do see, a lot of HIV and TB. And I think what was hard for me at that time is that for the first time in seeing the sheer numbers of patients who were young, who were dealing with the consequences of uncontrolled HIV or multiple TB infections. You're seeing 20-year-olds, you're seeing people in their teens, young adults in their 30s dying from something that's entirely preventable. You're seeing their children, often breadwinners, suffer and pass on or stay in hospital for months because they have MDR TB. Especially if you've got a patient for a long time because they're dealing with a lot of complications. You get to know them, you get to know their family, when they come to visit. I mean, you might have a patient for 4 months and then they die. So that's hard to deal with sometimes. But I think what I really gained from this was the power of empathy. I really could build good relationships with a lot of these patients. I learned how empathy can affect your patient management. And I also learned the importance of a multidisciplinary team while I was here, because Khayelitsha is quite a small hospital. You become very close-knit and you work very closely with other disciplines, occupational therapy, your physios, your dietitians, your social workers, which is so important in a place like Khayelitsha Hospital. And I really learned to work well with my colleagues here. And you kind of learn the importance of cultural competence and understanding the social determinants of health, I think, in this area. It strengthened my clinical skills, and I think it reinforced my dedication to making a meaningful difference in these patients.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Desiree, and for painting a bit of picture of the healthcare issues specifically connected to the specific district and area that you worked in during the time that you did. If we could just go back, COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges, particularly during your specialized training, but more so for everyone globally. How did you manage COVID patients? And you also lost your grandmothers during this final exam period that you went through. So it was both a challenge for you personally and professionally. How did you come through that time? If you don't mind sharing a little bit about that.
Managing COVID-19 patients during my specialization was probably one of the most challenging periods of my career, both personally and professionally. The pandemic, it intensified the already demanding nature of medical training, and we had to adapt rapidly to evolving protocols and address a high volume of critically ill patients. Initially, in the first wave, I worked in the COVID ICU. Obviously, we didn't know what we were dealing with back then and the volume that occurred. But, seeing the patients being ventilated, what struck me very early on is the patients we were admitting during that lockdown tended to be the essential workers. So a lot of times we had patients who were the breadwinners for their family, who were young and generally healthy, being ventilated and passing on. And that was quite difficult to see. But I think the low point of all of this was during the second wave. I remember one of my 24-hour calls I did. It was actually just before Christmas, I remember. I had a call, and between the hours of 2 and 7 a.m., I certified 7 patients where they ranged from the age of 30 years old to 55. And that was really hard for me because you're not expecting otherwise healthy people who are young to die. That was really quite a low point during all of this. It actually still feels very fresh. It doesn't feel like it was that long ago. I can't even convey how difficult it was, because I think it's one of those things that you live through, but hope you'll never have to live through again. But at some point, I remember when, I think it was between the second wave and the third wave, I was actually at the garage filling petrol one day, and then I'd gone into the shop, and this man was listening to me talk to the lady behind the counter, and he says, "Oh, do you work at the hospital?" And I said, "Yes, I do. Do you remember me?" And I said, "No, sir, I don't remember you." And he says, "No, what you treated me when I was in the COVID ICU, I remember." And so he recognized my voice, because that's all he could see, because we used to wear PPE. And he was like, "No, I was in the COVID ICU during the first wave." And I thought that was like a turning point, because finally I was seeing someone who actually survived. We had so much death in that first wave in the ICU. And I actually got into my car afterwards and I cried, because you tend to forget the good and the people you did help. Sometimes so easy to just remember the loss and the death. So that was a good thing that, I could see someone that I had helped that could remember and feel that I'd made a difference. But yeah, it was a very difficult period of my life. And then on a personal level, losing both my grandmothers was, profoundly impactful. So there's a layer of personal grief that you're dealing with. I was doing my final specialization exams. And so you're dealing with that, and you're trying to balance that with working and then with trying to study. And I thought that's where I discovered the importance of having a social support. And you also need to learn how to prioritize your mental health. My family were really there for me. My friends were really there for me. And actually, I got a lot of support from the people at work, and I really appreciated it. I flew home to see my one granny, she was on her way. So I went to see her, and then I had to fly back to do a call, and she passed away. And they actually managed to last minute find a locum for me so that I wouldn't have to come back. But it's small things like that that really make your life a bit easier. But I think that's good managerial skills, where they actually support you in a way. If I'd come back, I probably would have been useless at work, dealing with the grief. So that was a good thing, just prioritizing things and always looking out for mental health. But relying on that social structure.
Thank you so much for sharing that very personal, reflection, but also just how you got through it. And I think that's a very important aspect, who you surround yourself with, your support network. I've heard many of my guests on this podcast saying that that's a very important aspect, and also just checking in with yourself, your own mental health and your own capacity, constantly being aware of what that is and how much you can take. This is one lady was like, you have to fill your own cup. She just kept saying that the whole time. So I definitely can relate to that as well. And also just say thank you so much for sharing. Desiree, you're one of the few female gastroenterologists in South Africa. How do you see the landscape of your field evolving, and what advice do you have for other young women aspiring to enter this specialty specifically?
If I think about when I first started, even in med school up to, first doing internship, if I look at, the people who were specializing, or the specialists who used to take us for TUTS, I remember them being predominantly male. And you kind of thought, okay, there's a lot of men around, especially in the more surgical or procedural kind of fields. And as I've been progressing through, you're seeing more and more women stepping up, deciding to step into these predominantly male worlds. I also remember there not being a lot of women of color. And so there was no one really that you could almost identify with. And representation is so important, but you didn't always get it. I mean, if you talk about something culturally, even if it's a female consultant and she's not of a similar background, they're not always going to understand what you're going through. It's hard to find someone who identifies, who is able to mentor you and things like that. But it's changing, and you're seeing more women of color, and it's actually so inspiring. It's amazing to see women thriving where you never saw it before. And as a woman, I feel sometimes you often bring a different perspective that men miss. A woman of color brings a completely different perspective. It's very encouraging seeing the movement we're having towards greater diversity and inclusivity. For a young woman aspiring to enter this world, I say pursue your passion. You need to embrace these opportunities to gain experience. Seeking mentorship from those who have paved the way is so, so vital. When I've had several students who I've actually spoken to, and they've said, it's so hard. You don't see anyone that I look like. I don't feel like I'm the smartest. I don't feel like I know as much. I feel like I'm in the background. And I've told them, you need to advocate for yourself, but you need to be proud of yourself and how far you've come. And sometimes, and I'm not speaking for them, but I find that as a person of color, sometimes for them, they've mentioned wanting to hide away a little bit more, not be as obvious or as upfront. And I think that we need to, as I said, start advocating for ourselves and be proud of the journeys we've made and where we are, because we all start at different places, but we all end up with the same degree. We should be proud of it, but just encourage each other.
That's perfect. Absolutely amazing. I'm so happy I connected with you, to be honest, to be able to share the story. I'm just thinking about the little girl who was under the tables taking public transport with her mom. And just like now you're here and you've accomplished so much, you've really achieved a lot. I mean, also just to mention some of your accolades, you were able to, one of it, the Discovery Health Clinical Excellence Award and the Solimark Scholarship. Maybe you can tell us more about your achievements and what this really meant to you and how these recognitions really impacted your ongoing research and your clinical work.
Winning the award and securing this scholarship, there were significant milestones. At that time, I actually realized that I really enjoyed research, both the outcomes, but also, the actual procedure of going through research. I don't think it was a personal achievement for me, but it was actually a team achievement. I got support and collaboration from my mentors, from my colleagues. I probably wouldn't have been, able to do what I could do without them. Winning it did validate my commitment to advancing knowledge in gastro, and I think understand the importance of continued innovation in the field. I plan to leverage these accomplishments to do further research. I feel like H. pylori is a critical issue. And then I want to address, all this antibiotic resistance because it's got implications for patient care. Winning the scholarship provided a platform for me to delve deeper into these areas and contribute to the development of evidence-based guidelines. And then I think ultimately these achievements enhance my ability to mentor as well. I want to inspire the next generation of gastroenterologists, and I hope to encourage them to pursue clinical and research excellence.
And you've actually in part answered one of my last questions, which is specifically around, your teaching and mentoring. This is a very important aspect of your career. You just said why this is a passion for you, but maybe as we close off, do you ever take time away from your work? Because it doesn't sound like it. You have a break sometimes, and if you do, what do you enjoy to do on your free time when you're not saving lives?
I do have a lot of interest. I don't read as much because I tend to feel guilty that I'm not reading, work. But I do like to read. I like doing puzzles, crossword puzzles, and the New York Times spelling bee. But I love to travel. I recently went to Europe for a holiday, but I love to travel. I think it's one of the greatest things is to see different kind of cultures, different experience, different foods. I'm a bit of a foodie, so I love to eat different things, try different wines. I spend time with my friends, with my family. And I actually like to exercise as well. I think one of the best things I found for mental health is exercise. That's actually one of the things that pulled me through studying, and a lot of my personal issues has always been exercise. I think it's the serotonin, that kind of helps. Interestingly enough, Dawn, did you know that outside of the brain, which has the most serotonin receptors, the gut has the second most serotonin receptors? Happy gut, happy life.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know someone very specific that I want to share this information with. Just in terms of your future plans and what you see for yourself in the next, say, 5 to 10 years, if you can just paint a bit of a picture, a manifest, go crazy. Tell us more about what you have planned for the future, Desiree.
I would love to remain in academics. I love to teach, whether it be, teaching bedside or teaching, in TUTS or lectures or even teaching endoscopy. I love teaching. Anyone who knows me will tell you that I believe knowledge should be shared. I share every resource I have available because there's no point in it dying with you. And so I want to keep teaching for as long as I'm able. But I'd also like to be in an academic center where I can both teach but also learn more. So gastroenterology is one of those things that's rapidly changing. Do you know, like what used to be treated with a surgery 10 years ago is now being treated with a scope. The fact that you can remove cancer with a colonoscopy, which completely removes the need for surgery, to me blows my mind. Every single month, they're developing something new, a different procedure that can be done endoscopically. And it's a growing field. I mean, you don't even need bariatric surgery anymore. You put in a balloon with a scope. There's so many things that are changing, and it's this landscape that's evolving. And I think that excites. So for the next 5 to 10 years, I'm hoping to improve my skills as well with endoscopy, be able to do some more advanced things if I can, because there's so few of us in the country, gastroenterologists in general, never mind females. There's room to grow, there's room to learn, there's room to do different things and improve my skill set. So yeah, I'm very excited about that. But yeah, I'm hoping 5 to 10 years to be in an academic center, maybe a PhD, building on research I've done so far with H. pylori, and to keep teaching and scoping.
It sounds great. Inshallah, I mean, all of that stuff will come your way.
Thank you.
I will definitely.
Thank you so much.
Be following you and keeping in touch with you over the time. So happy to be able to chat to you. And then just one last and final message to your fellow healthcare, professionals, but also just women in the sector. A last message to them as well. Thanks.
One of the things I found is that as a woman, how you're perceived and your actions are perceived very differently if you were a man. And I think we as women tend to kind of dull our femininity to fit into men. And I think that's something that needs to change. We need to be happily female and embrace our femininity and show other young girls that you don't have to change who you are to fit in, but they should change to embrace you. And I think that's something that slowly is changing over time. But, now is the time when we should just be encouraging each other as women. I love the amount of women I'm seeing in medicine now, and I think that number should only grow with time.
Dr. Desiree Moodley's story is a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of dedication in healthcare. As a leader in gastroenterology, she not only treats patients but also shapes the future of medicine. Thank you so much for joining me today in exploring her remarkable journey. If you found this episode inspiring, please be sure to subscribe for more stories of extraordinary individuals in the world of healthcare. Until next time, greetings from me, Dawn Numdu, our technical producer Megan van der Vent, and the rest of the team #HealthFormZanzi. Stay inspired.